terms of career path for product manager, what are the what is the typical, I would say, path?
Well, it used to be when I first started my career, the natural progression would be an entry-level PM, senior PM, and move up to director roles and start taking on people manager responsibilities. But I've seen definitely in the last few years, there is also an individual contributor track. Some people don't want to be people managers, especially in really large companies. So there are two paths to where you could go to where you're a people manager and you run a team of PMs, or if you prefer to be an individual contributor, you still have different levels, so entry level, senior, principal, and so forth. So I found that if you don't want to go down the people manager path, that's not necessarily required in order for you to succeed. So you have a couple paths there.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you, David. A question here from Theo. What are the most common challenges that PM typically faces?
Challenges, you said?
Yes.
Yeah, great question. And the one thing I'll probably say multiple times, so apologies for the redundancy, but prioritization is key. So that's not just prioritization of features for your products, but it's tasks. So because a product manager is kind of the center of everything and is interacting with all other stakeholders and organizations within a company, you'll be constantly asked to do things and you can't do everything at once at the same time. So you have to basically, depending on what your goals are, make sure that you prioritize according to that. One thing I learned early on from a great manager and mentor that I had is that you have to basically say, be able to say no. If you don't say no, you don't have a strategy. So there's a lot of saying no, which is another challenge for a PM, is that you're telling other people in your organization that need something from you, no, I can't do that right now, or customers asking for features. It's a lot of saying no there. The other challenge is, depending on the organization, and because you're a PM, you're the champion of the product or your products, is going to be competing for resources. So no company has an unlimited amount of engineering resources to get stuff done. So that's part of the fun, right? I mean, it's your job is to be the champion and work with other peers and other groups that are competing for the same resources. But it still is very challenging. I mean, that's why one of the most important things that you need to understand as a PM is to be very data driven and less anecdotal. So when you're going in and making a case, your business cases, or asking for resources or asking for decisions to be made, it needs to be heavily data driven. The other thing too is, depending on the organization and your products, is the balance between a legacy product and what we call a new shiny object. So you've got a legacy product line that's kind of paying the bills and kind of making a steady stream of money. How much you want to put on that versus how much you want to focus on maybe a brand new product that you're introducing to address a major market trend. So it's difficult to balance those things out. But I'd say definitely prioritization of daily tasks, the backlog, engineering is just, again, you're going to be asked to do a lot of different things. And the other important part with the prioritization is to make sure you set expectations with whoever's asking for stuff. So don't overpromise and underdeliver, in other words. So prioritization is probably the most important skill and the biggest challenge that I've faced.
Okay. And is this something that you have like a recommendation or an advice on how our young audience there, as they start their career, how they can develop that skill?
I don't know if there's some, I mean, that's part of mentoring as well, and talking to experienced PMs on how they handle it. The most important thing is, and it depends, some people are really task driven very organized. It could be as simple as making lists based on your priorities. The other thing too that will drive that is if your company has MBOs or other things like goals that you have for a specific time period, that will affect your prioritization. But really, it's just to have a plan. Like in terms of prioritization in features and functionality in the product, it all has to map to your strategy. You have to have a strategy, and that typically has pillars underneath that. And everything that you do should drive towards those goals to go after that strategy. But just in terms of tools, I mean, I've used Post-it notes and Excel, Smartsheet, and things like that. But it's really just making sure you understand what, and this is part, the young PM, it's the responsibility of, well, both of you, but it's the responsibility of you and your manager to understand what your priorities should be. So you'll get help from your manager to understand. I mean, that's why they're there. Will help you prioritize. And the most important thing there is just to make sure you have constant communication with your manager and peers as well, and make sure everything you're doing is driving to achieve goals.
Okay, thank you, David. Let's see here. So what is, because the main, I'd say, topic of today's webinar is ultimately the goal is to teach and show what makes product managers successful. So in your expertise, what makes a product manager successful?
Being focused on the customer problems, because at the end of the day, that's what you're doing. You have to be open-minded, because one of the challenges I didn't mention in the challenges question, but is the relationship between engineering and product management. Some people think that it needs to be adversarial. I disagree with that. There's a such thing as positive tension, which means you're pushing each other, but you're still driving towards the same goals. So the open-mindedness, because the engineering will think different than you and vice versa. Within a PM organization, you could have older PMs like myself and newer entry-level PMs that think differently. So each side needs to think, they may go about solving problems differently. So you need to be able to learn from each other. So open-mindedness is huge. Communication is huge. So one of the things that you'll do more often than not is communicate one way or the other, whether you're doing a presentation, you're sending an email, whatever. So communication skills, as far as what a PM needs, is huge. That's both verbal, visual. You'll communicate via PowerPoint more often than not, I found. And that's very important. So in my background, I was terrified of public speaking before I got my TPM job. And that forced it out of me real quick. You start to present, but as a PM, you will present not only to your peers, but executives, customers, and other organizations. So working on your presentation skills is absolutely essential.
That's great. Thank you, David. Let's see, another question here, I think from Tio, and I think you already touched on that. As far as managing others, I think you did mention that product managers, they don't often do that, but they may or may not. It's really, I think, depending on I guess what they. It seems like, I think you mentioned that they have essentially the option if they want to manage others, depending on the level.
Yeah, that's actually a great point that I didn't fully go into, is that one of the challenge that comes, especially when you're an individual contributor like I am, is you often work with other groups. So it could be other product lines, but it's other organizations within a company, and you have to be able to influence without having direct supervisory role over someone. That's very common. So it's often, they're not even dotted lines. You're just getting a group of people together and you want to drive your product or specific initiatives that you're able to influence without being someone's manager. But like I mentioned, there is the other path where you could be a people manager. But even if you are a people manager, you're still going to have in that role to work with other organizations without having a direct supervisory role.
So so what you're saying is that even if you're a people manager, you just want to make sure that I understand. So do you still get to also manage the product directly somehow, or do you have, or you manage it through others, through the people that you manage?
It depends on the size of the company. Typically, if you're, say, at director level, your subordinates will actually do the day-to-day PM. But as the director, you are responsible for making sure the strategy is coherent, upward communication to superiors, really being a champion for your employees and always having their best interests in mind. But typically, you wouldn't, as a people manager, directly manage the products. But it could vary.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you, David.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm just looking at here and see if there is any other question. It looks like we're all good. Just going to give them another minute, and while we're waiting, I just wanted to get, I guess, your thought on maybe last advice, anything that we haven't covered that you think would be relevant for our discussion here as we try to really help our audience either get a job in product management or making it easier for them to get a job.
Well, sorry to be redundant here, but what we talked about before is creating the network. I'm not a giant fan of social media, but I love LinkedIn. Definitely look to see if you can get if you have a strong LinkedIn profile, you may be contacted by recruiters for interns. I would highly recommend that. So getting that experience prior to graduation is essential, but being able to create a network, it's that almost every job I've gotten is because of somebody I knew. So that's very important. So in the counselors, the high counselor, or myself, other people can help make connections because we frequently get requests from recruiters if looking for certain roles. So developing a network is absolutely huge, but I'd say making sure LinkedIn, your skills are updated, in everything. Make sure it's very clear what it is that you would like to do, what you're skilled in, and a lot of times the opportunities will come to you. But it's very much like Randy said earlier, trying to get a job without having a connection is very, very difficult. A good resume, cover letter, things like that could go a long way, but you're in much better shape if you can get somebody to make an introduction into a company.
Okay, thank you, David, and that provides really a great segue for me to actually wrap up this webinar. So thank you again so much, David. So for those that are listening, as David said, I mean, today, to get a job at pretty much any company, small, big, tech, whatever industry it's in, knowing someone on the inside is really key. And I share your experience, David. For me also, all the jobs that I've had, you know, it has always been thanks to someone who, you know, who who handed my resume to the right people. So having knowing someone on the inside and getting a referral is really the key, and that's exactly what Hack Counselor tries to do. So again, simply depending on based on your industry, your role, the type of help you need, you can simply just log on to our platform, search for counselor or company insider, and just connect with them, and again, it will, I'm sure, help you. Thank you again so much, David, for taking the time to do this webinar with us. We've learned a lot, and thank you. So we'll invite you again really soon. Okay.
All right. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye.